Hey guys, how's it going? TJ here with Dead History, and I'm here today with Henry.
Hi.
And today is our next Vice Presidential Series installment, and we're taking a look at who, Henry?
George Clinton.
That's right, George Clinton. And what number vice president is he?
The fourth.
The fourth vice president of the United States, George Clinton. Wait a minute.
Not that George Clinton.
No, not this George Clinton. Not the guy that's a part of the Parliament Funkadelic or whatever the band name was. Not the musician George Clinton. This one. Yes, this one. That George Clinton. The fourth vice president of the United States. And we got some really cool things to tell you about George Clinton. But first, before we get into our fourth vice president of the United States, Henry, tell the people what they have to do.
Hit subscribe down below, leave all your comments and questions, and give the thumbs up.
That's right, great job. Hit subscribe down below, give us a like and a thumbs up, leave all those comments and questions, we love those. And now we're going to sit back and relax and take a look at the fourth vice president of the United States, George Clinton. And this is
Dead History.
Dead History. How's it going? TJ back with you, here with Henry.
Hi.
And yes, the guy behind us, the fourth vice president of the United States, George Clinton. The man who is our next Vice Presidential Series installment. And we got some cool things to tell you about George Clinton, such as, Henry and I, our very first video we ever made for this YouTube channel, Dead History.
We went to his gravesite.
We went to George Clinton's gravesite up there in Kingston, New York. We're going to take a look and show you that, of course. Also, George Clinton, he was the very first vice president to be vice president under two different presidents. Yeah, he was vice president for Thomas Jefferson's second term, and then he was vice president for James Madison. So there you go. He was vice president for two different presidents. Pretty cool stuff. We're going to get into all these fascinating things. So you guys did the likes. You did the subscribes. Hopefully you're leaving those comments and questions, right? We love those. We had our question and answer video. We love the questions from all our subscribers. And now, Henry, it's been a little while. Tell the people what they got to go get.
Go get the popcorn and the pretzels and the soda and all that stuff.
That's right, all that good stuff.
Potato chips.
And the potato chips. Go get it all. Because here we go. We got the next Vice Presidential Series installment. Taking a look at George Clinton, the fourth vice president behind us. Sit back, relax, and enjoy.
Hey guys, it's Henry's Dead History, and I hope you enjoyed this week's episode looking at George Clinton.
Hey guys, welcome. TJ here with Dead History, and welcome to our next installment of our Vice Presidential Series as we take a look at the fourth Vice President of the United States, George Clinton. Hope you liked our little introduction there by Henry saying hello. Of course, I am flying solo for the audio portion of this week's installment. I hope the audio sounds good. I am recording it in a little bit of a different spot. I've done this before, and you guys always tell me it sounds good, so hopefully this sounds good. Just a couple quick things I do want to touch on before we jump into George Clinton. First and foremost, I want to give a big shout out and a big congratulations to Henry. Henry plays baseball in our local Little League. Henry is only 7 years old. He'll be 8 next month. So he plays in a league where, they pitch with a pitching machine. So it's, still a pretty developmental league. However, Henry hit his very first career home run yesterday. And no, it was not a ball that he hit, that kids just didn't catch, and he ran the bases. He actually hit a legit home run. He hit a line drive shot down the left field line, and he actually rang it off the left field foul pole. So, proud moment for me, proud moment for Henry. He actually was the first player of the fall season, which started yesterday. Our fall season started yesterday, to hit a home run in the league. So, congratulations to Henry. Very proud of him. Just wanted to give him a shout out though, because well deserved. He played a heck of a game yesterday. So, and also now little housekeeping notes. Two quick things. I wanted to say first and foremost, again, just thank you to everyone for everything that you guys do, the support. We put up that video last week, the Aaron Burr, the very first vice presidential video. It was extremely long. I know it was. It was 2.5 hours long, but we still had like 100 views on it. A bunch of people liked it, commented. We are doing the vice presidential series moving forward. There will be 2 parts for every vice president, just like you guys were used to with the presidential series. We'll have a part 1 on Thursday and a part 2 on Friday. No, they're not going to be as long as Aaron Burr, probably. If I had to guess, I would say they'll probably be in the hour and 15, hour and 20 minute total time range. So I would think part 1 be about 40 minutes and part 2 would be about 40 minutes long. So, but I figured it would be better just to break it up for you guys, make it easier. So that's what we'll do moving forward. We'll do 2 parts for each vice president. If for some reason there's a vice president where I just do not have enough information to make 2 parts, where it'll only be like a 30 or 40 minute video, part 1, that's what we'll do. And I'll let you guys know that. So, this one, though, George Clinton, will be 2 parts, part 1 and a part 2, and that's the way we'll do this moving forward. So, there you go. I think that's pretty much it as far as the housekeeping stuff goes. There is going to be a very, very fun live stream coming up on our channel. It won't be until November, so we're still about 2 months away, but I will be announcing that hopefully in the next couple of weeks, what that's going to be. And I can assure you that anybody who's watched this channel for a long time, over the last 10 months or so, you will be very happy at what this next live stream on this channel is going to be. It's going to be a lot of fun. So, a lot of things coming down the pike, too, just to let you guys know. Looks like we are going to have some merchandise, maybe some t-shirts or some coffee mugs or something like that with our logo. We're going to be having different things like that. We might even do a Patreon account where, if you subscribe for, $5 a month, you get like this content. If you do like a higher package of like, $15 a month or something, you get a personalized like video message or even a video phone call, like a Zoom call with me and Henry. We'll figure it out. Just some fun stuff that we're going to throw out there to people. I will tell you this, that I have already discussed with several local businesses and like places like libraries and stuff. Once we get to 10,000 subscribers, which we're already at almost 7,000, once we hit 10,000 or more on this channel, we may even do like a meet and greet somewhere in the tri-state area, New Jersey, New York, where Henry and I go to like a local library, like on a Saturday from, 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock or something like that. And anybody that's a local fan that lives there can come, stop by, say hello to us, get a picture with us, that sort of thing. So lots of things coming down the pike. So be ready. Hopefully you guys will be looking forward to some stuff. So, all right, so let's jump right in here. George Clinton, our 4th vice president of the United States. First thing we'll kind of take a look at is the election of 1804. The election of 1804 was between Thomas Jefferson, who was the incumbent president. He was going up for a second term, and he was going up against Charles C. Pinckney, who was a Federalist, actually, from South Carolina. And Thomas Jefferson's running mate this time would be George Clinton. Aaron Burr obviously was dropped. George Clinton was Thomas Jefferson's running mate, and they won. Thomas Jefferson won re-election, so George Clinton became Thomas Jefferson's vice president for his second term. So that's how George Clinton came about as far as the vice presidency. Pretty interesting, pretty cool stuff. And yeah, So that's kind of the way it started for George Clinton in 1804 with the re-election of Jefferson there. Clinton, just so everyone knows, George Clinton, he was born in 1739 in Little Britain, which is a province of New York. His parents were Colonel Charles Clinton and Elizabeth Denniston Clinton. They were Presbyterian immigrants who had left County Longford, Ireland in 1729 to escape religious persecution by the British that imposed severe disabilities on non-Anglican, non-Anglican Protestants and Catholics. Apparently, it was just some sort of persecution regarding Protestants and Catholics. And his political interests were inspired by his father, who was a farmer, a surveyor, and a land speculator. And he served as a member of the New York Colonial Assembly. George Clinton was the brother of General James Clinton and the uncle of New York's future governor, DeWitt Clinton. And George was tutored by a local Scottish clergyman. So pretty cool stuff. He also did spend some time in the French and Indian War. During the French and Indian War, George Clinton served on the privateer Defiance operating in the Caribbean before enlisting in the provincial militia, where his father held the rank of colonel. During the French and Indian War, George Clinton rose to the rank of lieutenant, accompanying his father in 1758 on Bradstreet's 1758 seizure of Fort Frontenac, cutting one of the major communication and supply lines between the eastern centers of Montreal and Quebec City and France's western territories. George and his brother James were instrumental in capturing a French vessel. So George Clinton was actually part of the French and Indian War. Pretty cool stuff. So we're going to get right into things. We're going to jump in here. We're going to be, of course, reading from the Senate.gov website. Senate.gov website is awesome. Awesome information about the vice president. It's really, really awesome. That's pretty much where I'm getting the majority, probably 95% of what I'm going to be reading and telling you guys and narrating to you guys. That's where I'm getting the information from. So here we go. George Clinton, our fourth vice president of the United States. George Clinton took office as the nation's fourth vice president on March 4th of 1805. He was the second vice president to serve under Thomas Jefferson, having replaced fellow New Yorker Aaron Burr, whose intransigence in 1800 had nearly cost Jefferson the presidency. A Revolutionary War hero who had served as governor of New York for 2 decades, George Clinton seemed an ideal choice to supplant Burr while preserving the New York-Virginia alliance that formed the backbone of the Jeffersonian Republican coalition. Even though Republican senators may have been relieved to be rid of Burr, the contrast between their new presiding officer and his urbane, elegant predecessor must have been painfully apparent when Chief Justice John Marshall administered the oath of office to Jefferson and Clinton in the Senate chamber. Jefferson offered a lengthy inaugural speech celebrating the accomplishments of his first term, but George Clinton declined to address the members of Congress and the large concourse of citizens present. 2 days earlier, on March 2nd of 1805, Aaron Burr had regaled the Senate with a correct and elegant farewell oration so laden with emotion that even Clinton's friend, Senator Samuel L. Mitchell, a Republican from New York, pronounced the scene one of the most affecting of my life. But when Clinton assumed the presiding officer's chair on December 16th of 1805, 2 weeks into the first session of the Ninth Congress, he was so weak and feeble of voice that, according to Senator William Plumer, the senators could not hear the one half of what he says. George Clinton's age and infirmity had, if anything, enhanced his value to the president, because Jefferson intended to pass his party's mantle to the Secretary of State James Madison when he retired after his second term. Yet he needed an honest, plain Republican vice president in the meantime. George Clinton would be 69 in 1808, too old, Jefferson anticipated, to challenge Madison for the Republican presidential nomination. Clinton had already retired once from public life in 1795, pleading ill health. But for all Clinton's apparent frailty, he was still a force to be reckoned with. His earlier decision to retire owed as much to the political climate in New York and to his own political misfortunes as to his chronic rheumatism. He had been an actual or prospective vice presidential candidate in every election since the first one in 1788, and later capped his elective career with a successful run for the office in 1808. George Clinton was, in the words of a recent biographer, an enigma. The British forces that torched Kingston, New York during the Revolution, as well as the 1911 conflagration that destroyed most of Clinton's papers at the New York Public Library, have deprived modern researchers of sources that might have illuminated his personality and explained his motives. Much of the surviving evidence, however, coupled with the observations of Clinton's contemporaries, support historian Alan Taylor's assessment that Clinton crafted a masterful, compelling public persona that masked and permitted an array of contradictions that would have ruined a lesser, more transparent politician. He was, in Taylor's view, the astutest politician in revolutionary New York, a man who understood the power of symbolism and the new popularity of a plain style, especially when practiced by a man with the means and accomplishments to set himself above the common people. George Clinton's parents were Presbyterian immigrants who left Longford County, Ireland in 1729 to escape an intolerant Anglican regime that imposed severe disabilities on religious dissenters. Charles and Elizabeth Denniston Clinton settled in Ulster County, New York, where the future vice president was born on July 26th of 1739. Charles Clinton was a farmer, surveyor, and land speculator whose survey of the New York frontier so impressed the governor that he was offered a position as sheriff of New York City and the surrounding county in 1748. After the elder Clinton declined the honor, the governor designated young George Clinton as successor to the clerk of the Ulster County Court of Common Pleas, a position he would assume in 1759 and hold for the rest of his life. George Clinton studied under a Scottish clergyman to prepare for his future responsibilities, interrupting his education at the age of 18 in 1757 to serve in the French and Indian War. After the war, he read law in New York City under the renowned attorney William Smith. He began his legal practice in 1764, and he became district attorney the following year. Clinton's aptitude for surveying and his penchant for land speculation eventually made him one of the wealthier residents of Ulster County. But despite his considerable fortune, he was a man of frugal habits and congenial, unassuming manners. Even in later life, when chronic ill health made it difficult for him to perform his public duties, observers remarked on his pleasing cheerfulness and flow of good humor. Large-boned and coarse-featured, he was, one scholar relates, a man of powerful physique, whose mere presence commanded respect. In 1768, the 29-year-old Clinton was elected to the New York Assembly, where he supported the Livingston faction, an alliance that he cemented 2 years later with his marriage to Cornelia Tappan, a Livingston relative. The Livingstons and their allies, who represented the wealthy, predominantly Presbyterian landowners of the Hudson Valley, assumed a vehemently anti-British posture as relations between England and her North American colonies deteriorated during the early 1770s. George Clinton emerged as their leader in 1770 when he defended a member of the Sons of Liberty imprisoned for seditious libel by the Royalist majority that still controlled the New York Assembly. He was a delegate to the Second Continental Congress in 1775, where a fellow delegate observed that Clinton has abilities but is silent in general and wants, when he does speak, that influence to which he is entitled. Clinton disliked legislative service because, as he explained, the duty of looking out for danger makes men cowards. And he soon resigned his seat to accept an appointment as a brigadier general in the New York militia. He was assigned to protect the New York frontier, where his efforts to prevent the British from gaining control of the Hudson River and splitting New England from the rest of the struggling Confederacy earned him a brigadier general's commission in the Continental Army and made him a hero among the farmers of the western counties. The social and political changes that the Revolution precipitated worked to Clinton's advantage, and he made the most of his opportunities. As Edward Countryman so forcefully demonstrated in his study of revolutionary New York, the independence crisis shattered old New York, both politically and socially. The state's new constitution greatly expanded the suffrage and increased the size of the state legislature. The yeoman farmers of small and middling means, who had previously deferred to the Livingstons and their royalist rivals, the Delanceys, emerged as a powerful political entity in their own right, and George Clinton became their champion and spokesman. Their support proved crucial in the 1777 gubernatorial election, when George Clinton defeated Edward Livingston in a stunning upset that signaled the dismemberment of the old Livingston Party. The election also signaled Clinton's emergence as a dominant figure in New York politics. He served as governor from 1777 until 1795, and again from 1801 until 1804, exercising considerable influence over the state legislature. Before leaving the battlefield to assume his new responsibilities, George Clinton promised his commander-in-chief, General George Washington, that he would resume his military duties. "She'd the business of my new appointment admit of it." True to his word, he soon returned to the field to help defend the New York frontier. There, American troops under his command prevented Sir Henry Clinton, said to have been a distant cousin, from relieving the main British force under General John Burgoyne, precipitating Burgoyne's surrender at Saratoga on October 17th of 1777. The Saratoga victory, which helped convince the French that the struggling colonies were worthy of the aid that proved so crucial to the revolutionary effort, marked a turning point in the war. George Clinton's civilian labors were equally impressive. Like other wartime governors, he was responsible for coordinating his state's war effort. New York's strategic importance and large loyalist population, coupled with Vermont's succession in 1777, posed special problems for the beleaguered governor, but he proved an able administrator. He was increasingly frustrated, however, as war expenses mounted, and as the Continental Congress, which lacked the power to raise revenues and relied on state contributions, looked to New York to make up the shortfall that resulted when other states failed to meet their quotas. He supported Alexander Hamilton's call for a stronger Congress with independent revenue-raising powers, warning Continental Congress President John Hanson in 1781 that we shall not be able, without a change in our circumstances, long to maintain our civil government. George Clinton's perspective changed in 1783 after Congress asked the states to approve a national tariff that would deprive New York of its most lucrative source of income. He had long believed that Congress should facilitate and protect the foreign commerce that was so important to New York. Toward that end, he had supported Hamilton's efforts to strengthen the Articles of Confederation during the war. But the specter of a national tariff helped convince him that a national government with vastly enlarged powers might overwhelm the states and subvert individual liberties. When stronger powers for Congress would benefit New York, his biographer explains, Clinton would endorse such measures. In purely domestic matters, the governor would put New York concerns above all others. The governor's primary concern, according to another scholar, was to avoid any measure which might burden his agrarian constituents with taxes. The tariff had supplied nearly a third of New York's revenue during the 1780s, and George Clinton feared that if this critical source of income was diverted to national coffers, the state legislature would be forced to raise real estate and personal property taxes. George Clinton emerged as one of the most prominent opponents of the new Constitution. He was a delegate to the New York Ratification Convention, where an anti-federalist majority elected him presiding officer. But with the establishment of the federal union, almost a foregone conclusion by the time the convention assembled at Poughkeepsie on June 17th of 1788, 8 states had already ratified, with the enabling 9th expected to follow. George Clinton's options were sharply limited. He had initially hoped to secure a conditional ratification, contingent upon the adoption of amendments calculated to abridge and limit federal power. But after the anti-federalists failed to agree on a common strategy and popular sentiment shifted in favor of unconditional ratification, there was little he could do to accomplish even this limited objective. Bowing to the inevitable, he finally signaled his allies that if their constituents had come to favor unconditional ratification, they should vote accordingly. He did so, as biographer John Kaminsky suggests, because he sensed that he might make the perfect vice presidential candidate. Once elected, Vice President Clinton could advise Washington support constitutional amendments as he presided over the first United States Senate, and perhaps be heir apparent when Washington decided to retire. Friends of the new Constitution were much alarmed when New York and Virginia anti-federalists proposed Clinton as a vice presidential candidate in 1788. James Madison was horrified that the enemies to the government are laying a train for the election of Governor Clinton. And Alexander Hamilton worked to unite Federalists behind John Adams. Well-placed rumors tainted Clinton's candidacy by indicating that anti-Federalist electors intended to cast one of their 2 electoral votes for Richard Henry Lee or Patrick Henry for president, and the other vote for the New York governor. Prior to the ratification of the 12th Amendment in 1804, electors cast 2 votes in presidential elections without distinguishing between presidential and vice presidential candidates, and the runner-up in the presidential race simply became vice president. Each elector, however, voted with the clear intent of electing one individual as president and the other as vice president. In the charged and expectant atmosphere surrounding the first election under the new Constitution, Federalists who learned of the rumored conspiracy to elect Lee or Henry president feared that a vote for Clinton would be tantamount to a vote against George Washington. Popular enthusiasm for the new government and Clinton's well-known opposition to the Constitution also worked against him. John Adams won the vice presidency with 34 electoral votes. Clinton received 3 of 35 remaining electoral votes that were distributed among a field of 10 favorite son candidates. Clinton fared better in the 1792 election. By the end of Washington's first term, the cabinet was seriously divided over Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton's financial system, and all parties agreed that Washington's re-election was essential to the survival of the infant republic. In spite of their earlier reservations about Clinton, Secretary of State Thomas Jefferson and his Virginia allies, Madison and James Monroe, were determined to replace the monarchist and abrasive Vice President Adams. They considered the yeoman politician from New York the candidate most likely to unseat him. George Clinton's candidacy faced several obstacles. He was still widely suspect as an opponent of the Constitution, and the circumstances of his re-election as governor earlier in the year had raised the consternation of even his most steadfast supporters. John Jay, the Federalist candidate, had received a majority of the votes in the gubernatorial race, but the destruction of ballots from Federalist-dominated Otsego County on highly suspicious technical grounds by anti-Federalist canvassers had tipped the balance in Clinton's favor. Jefferson worried that the New York election would jeopardize the cause of republicanism, and Madison went so far to suggest that Clinton should resign the governorship if he believed that he had been fraudulently elected. Even though Adams was re-elected vice president with 77 electoral votes, George Clinton managed to garner a respectable 50 votes, carrying Virginia, Georgia, New York, and North Carolina. The election provided a limited measure of comfort to Jefferson and Madison, who saw in the returns a portent of future success for the emerging Republican coalition. Despite his strong showing in the national election, Governor George Clinton found it increasingly difficult to maintain his power base in New York. Pleading exhaustion and poor health, he announced his retirement in 1795. Although his rheumatism was by that time so severe that he could no longer travel to Albany to convene the state legislature, other factors influenced his decision. The circumstances of his 1792 re-election remained a serious liability, and his effectiveness had been greatly diminished when the Federalists gained control of the state legislature in 1793. George Clinton was further compromised when his daughter Cornelia married the flamboyant and highly suspect French emissary citizen Edmund Gannett in 1794. George Clinton remained an attractive vice presidential prospect for Republican leaders hoping to preserve the Virginia-New York nexus so crucial to their strategy, although he was never entirely comfortable with the southern wing of the party. Party strategists tried to enlist Clinton as their vice presidential candidate to balance the ticket headed by Thomas Jefferson in 1796, but he refused to run. He soon found himself at odds with Jefferson, who became vice president in 1797 after receiving the second highest number of electoral votes. In his March 4, 1797 inaugural address to the Senate, Thomas Jefferson praised his predecessor, President John Adams, as a man of talents and integrity. George Clinton was quick to voice his outrage at this apparent public contradiction of the objections offered by his friends against Mr. Adams' election. In 1800, however, when approached by an emissary from Representative Albert Gallatin, George Clinton did agree to become Jefferson's running mate, although he seemed noticeably relieved when Republicans finally chose his fellow New Yorker, Aaron Burr, to balance their ticket. George Clinton ended his retirement in 1800 when he was elected to a seat in the New York legislature. He had entered the contest at Burr's urging to ensure the selection of Republican presidential electors and probably intended to retire when his term expired. But when New York Republicans, anticipating Jefferson's victory in the national election and hoping to consolidate their gains on the local level, asked him to enter the 1801 gubernatorial election, he agreed. He was at first reluctant to seek the nomination. His acceptance was subject to the caveat that he would resign the governorship if the office proved too much for him. But Aaron Burr soon provided him with a compelling reason to remain in the contest. 11 years earlier, Governor Clinton had appointed Aaron Burr Attorney General of New York. In 1789, with Federalists in control of the state legislature, he had been anxious to add Burr and his allies to the Clinton coalition. But he never completely trusted Burr, and his suspicions were confirmed when Burr refused to defer to Thomas Jefferson after the two candidates received an equal number of electoral votes in the 1800 presidential contest. After the furor subsided, and after the House of Representatives finally declared Jefferson the winner on the 36th ballot, George Clinton's nephew and political heir, DeWitt Clinton, predicted that Burr would resign the vice presidency and try to recoup his shattered fortunes by running for governor of New York. DeWitt apparently persuaded his uncle that he was the only prospective candidate who could prevent Burr from taking control of the state Republican Party. George Clinton was elected governor by an overwhelming margin, carrying traditionally Federalist New York City in all but 6 counties. During his last term as governor, George Clinton was overshadowed by his increasingly powerful and ambitious nephew. Still, although DeWitt was now the real power in New York politics, George Clinton was much revered by New York voters. Anxious to preserve the Virginia-New York coalition, but determined to limit Burr's role in his administration, Jefferson turned to Clinton for advice in making federal appointments in New York. "There is no one," he assured Clinton, "whose opinion would command me with greater respect than yours, if you would be so good as to advise me." Jefferson was in practical effect repudiating Burr. Although he never publicly disavowed or openly criticized his errant vice president. One Federalist observer soon noted that Burr is completely an insulated man in Washington. As the 1804 election approached, DeWitt wrote to members of the Republican caucus suggesting his Uncle George as a replacement for Burr as vice president. And I think with that, we're going to end this part 1. So this leads us pretty much right up to the vice presidency of George Clinton. Part 2, we're going to take a look at the vice presidency of George Clinton. We're going to take a look at, the later life. There really isn't any post-vice presidency because George Clinton actually died in office. So as vice president. So you're going to hear all about that. And we're going to talk about that. And then, of course, we'll do some fun facts and that sort of thing in part 2. So stay tuned for that. There will be at least one little thing of bonus footage coming up here at the end of this part 1. So stay tuned for that little tiny bit of bonus footage. Hope you enjoy it. Again, Aaron Burr, there was a lot of things for me to go see, especially locally here in New Jersey. But the reality is with vice presidents, the sites and locations are pretty limited. I'm going to try to get to and do as many as I can so you guys can see them in these videos, but there's nearly not as many as you would think, of course. So keep that in mind. But hope you enjoyed this part 1, taking a look at our 4th Vice President of the United States, George Clinton, our next Vice Presidential Series installment here at Dead History. So hope you enjoyed this part 1, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Leave those comments and questions below. We love those. And of course, stay tuned for tomorrow, part 2, the conclusion of our 4th Vice President, George Clinton. That'll be tomorrow. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow. Hey, guys. TJ here with Dead History. Right there, that sign. I'll flip you around. Actually in Little Britain, New York. And you see here, Little Britain was settled by John Humphrey. But it is the birthplace of New York's first governor and U.S. Vice President, George Clinton. So I wanted to show you guys this. There's actually a cool old little church right here that kind of has an old looking cemetery up there. It's pretty cool. No, that's not where George Clinton is. George Clinton is buried in Kingston, New York. You guys will see that, but there you go. Birthplace of George Clinton, our vice president, here in Little Britain, New York. So pretty cool stuff. Obviously the house and wherever he was born is no longer standing or in existence, but at least there's a sign saying that he was born here, so there you go. Thanks, guys.